Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of All About Art. And today I'm going to be talking about the art world on Clubhouse. For those of you who don't know, Clubhouse is quite a new social media app. So this is quite a trend episode because this is something that will be different in a few months, surely. But I wanted to talk about it now just because I find it all quite interesting, and I can always revise it later or do another episode on it later, maybe after I've been on Clubhouse for more than just a few weeks, and see if my opinion has changed, but we'll see. Anyway, the way that it works is once you create an account, you can enter different quote-unquote rooms. In these rooms, there are moderators and speakers on the theoretical podium, and there are listeners as well. So you can raise your hand and you can be brought up to be a speaker if you have a question or if you have something to contribute to the conversation. Almost all of these rooms are themed so that you know what you're entering. And the themes range from, for example, hot dogs are closer to tacos than a sandwich, which was the title of a room I saw recently, or, for example, rethinking time management, or things like silent networking, which is something that I'll touch on a little bit later. The rooms that are most relevant for me, and the ones that I enter on a regular basis, are those about art, obviously. Now, the more people that you follow who do things that are relevant to the topics you want to hear, the more that you will see talks that interest you. This obviously means that if you follow museum directors or gallery managers or, like me, art historians and curators, then when they take part in a talk or when they're a speaker or something like that, then you get a notification. If you have your notifications on, which is something that you can choose, then that is when you will be notified that they're taking part in a talk that might be of interest to you. Once you are in a room, it's not recorded like an Instagram Live or anything like that. So once the conversation is over, it's done. You can, of course, record with an external device, but you need to make everyone in the room aware of that. So basically, it's like taking the best things of Instagram Live, LinkedIn, and talking on the phone in a conference call. So I'm going to start off talking about the things that I find good about the app. And one of them is that you can interact with people. And because it's an app with a networking aim, there's no problem with getting in touch with people who inspire you on other social media channels or meeting up with them for a Zoom chat, which I've done on a couple of occasions. And it's been really, really lovely. It's also great if you get into a smaller room because there are people with really specific expertise and you can have a really good conversation with them. An example of this is that I was in a room that was giving advice on podcasts, and I actually got the advice on the hosting website that I use for this podcast. So although this doesn't really have anything to do with art, it has everything to do with this project. And it was absolutely amazing because this hosting website that I use was recently purchased by Spotify, and it's very popular in the United States as far as I understand, but it's not that commonly used in Europe. And so when I was researching different podcast hosting websites and things like that, it didn't really come up, and it hasn't really been used by a lot of people over in Europe, at least not from my Google searches. So it was really, really good to be having this almost one-on-one conversation because it was a really small room, and to be able to get that catered advice to these exact questions that I was asking, which is, how do I produce this podcast with as little cost as possible to me personally? So that's something that I've found really useful and really wonderful from the app. And another thing that I really enjoy on a regular basis is that myself and some other art historians and professionals within the arts host rooms every Wednesday, or well, almost every Wednesday, with the club called the Art History Collective. And it's really nice because, to be honest, I do notice that there are a lot of clubs and rooms that have a really strong focus on the art market. And so it is really nice to be able to go and talk about different theories and themes. And I remember we had one room that was talking about 20th century photography, and I was talking all about Irving Penn and things like that. So I really do enjoy that. I think that that's a very positive way of being able to have these discussions when, at the moment, because of the pandemic, it's really difficult to get together and have these discussions on a very casual basis. On the other hand, and excuse me for saying it so bluntly, but some people talk a load of crap. Not that many people do this, but there have been some uncomfortable conversations and comments. And I really notice that there is still an issue with who is listened to, meaning that the louder you are and the more you can push through, the more space you take up. And men end up talking to themselves and each other for an hour. And then a woman speaks after respectfully waiting instead of interrupting. And it almost seems like she can't even speak to the subject that she wanted to say something to because men end up talking over each other. And then I enter rooms where it's only women. And maybe it's because I'm a woman myself, but I just find that the conversations have a much better flow in that everyone has something to say and everyone can speak, and it doesn't feel like people are clamoring to talk over each other. It seems like people are really speaking with each other. And I feel like this is reminiscent of an article I read on BYU Magazine, which is a magazine that is by Brigham Young University in the United States. And this article is called When Women Don't Speak, and it was written in the spring of 2020. Within the article, an analysis of a study was presented from a situation where women in a predominantly male curriculum were spread out and everyone was divided into different teams so that there were women or one woman in each group. But of course, in comparison to men, they were still the minority. Basically, even though everyone seemed to report that they liked their groups, the results of this study showed that the program these students were on will not put a woman alone on a team of men again. And I'm going to quote the article here when I say that for a woman to really be heard and to be perceived as competent and influential, the professors conducting this study came to the conclusion that for women, having a seat at the table does not mean having a voice. The researchers who undertook this project state that systematically, women are seen as having less authority and being less influential, so that when they speak up, they are not listened to as much and they're interrupted more. The gender dynamics shutting down women are very, very real. But they make it clear that it's not necessarily always in outright hostile or misogynistic environments. But instead, it comes from bias from cultural norms and subtleties from the way that we've been socialized. The article goes into extensive detail about what makes up these situations and what the reasons for them are, and I really suggest giving it a read. I will put the link to it somewhere in the description of the podcast. But my point is, in relation to Clubhouse, I feel that this type of situation is very, very present, and I have definitely experienced it myself. Now, in addition, I don't think that I have found the right people to follow yet, because as I mentioned earlier in this episode, that is the thing about Clubhouse. You need to follow the right people in order to get notifications for the right kind of talks. And to be completely frank, I'm not that interested in the commercial art world. I am interested, but I'm not interested in only talking about that and only listening to that. And it seems to be some of the only things that I hear. So if more museum professionals and art historians go on the app and start talking about these types of things, I think that maybe it will be a more interesting place for me. I have been following a couple of really, really cool art historians and art professionals on the app, though, so I'm not trying to be too negative about it all because I have had some really, really wonderful discussions and I've heard some really, really wonderful points that I have found have taught me things. And these different perspectives have been very, very, dare I say, enlightening to some of the things that I've been thinking about and that have been on my mind lately when it comes to the arts and cultural sector. Now, this is something that can happen on any type of social media platform. So, in the arts, because Instagram is such a visual app, it is very useful. But to be completely honest, it is something that I find really important is to actually see what's behind it. And this is why I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about these silent networking rooms. And basically what a silent networking room is when you go in, everyone has their microphones off, and it's basically where you go and look at each other's profiles and at each other's bios and see if you're interested in connecting with the person. In the beginning, I did try this out and I looked into it, but I quickly realized that for me, just personally, it meant a lot more to listen to the person speak and feel like it resonated with me and feel like I agree with what the person represents and what the person is saying, much more than maybe their job title or the amount of followers that they have on Instagram. And I think that that's something that, because I'm very active on social media, something that I do need to remind myself, and this is something that I think is always said around people who are really active online and who put a lot of their life online. And it's that social media reflects a very, very minimal part of our everyday life. It is not reality, and numbers don't matter. Of course, numbers do matter when it's your job and you get paid for it. I'm just trying to say that there's no reason to put pressure on yourself for these things. And I'm saying it to myself just as much as I'm saying it to anyone who's listening. But that's why I do like Clubhouse, is because it's really lovely to find like-minded people whose opinions you really respect. And sometimes I find myself sitting there listening to these wonderful people speak, and, mostly really wonderful, impressive women. And I'm just nodding my head and thinking, yes. And then the other day we were talking about feminism in the arts, and this really lovely woman gave me so many different suggestions on books I could read, on blogs I could look at, and generally just on feminists and people within art historical discourse and anthropological discourse who are making a difference and who have published different things that are very relevant to right now. And it's just a really, really wonderful community to be in when you've found the people who you are seemingly on the same wavelength with. Another thing that I find really wonderful is how international it can be. I've listened to people in Los Angeles and New York, for example, or Hong Kong. And of course, it can be a little bit tricky when it comes to the time difference. But I've really, really enjoyed listening to people and learning from people from all over the world at different times of the day, even if it means that I sometimes do stay up until 1 a.m. And then connecting with people on other platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram. Speaking of Instagram, I did actually go on my Instagram stories and I asked a couple of questions. So the first thing that I asked was people to give me feedback about their experiences. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I also did a little questionnaire where people could pick out of 4 different answers. So one of the questions that I asked is, have you ever experienced and or heard, number 1, people talking over you, number 2, inappropriate or problematic comments, number 3, misinformation, and number 4, things you really disagree with. And I added onto that in my story is that not only is it things that you really disagree with, but also things that it's really difficult to then contradict or to say your opinion on, because even though you may be a speaker, the room is really full or a bunch of people are talking over each other, which ties back into the first point. And a lot of answers were people talking over you. And misinformation was a huge one as well. And so I think that that's something that's deeply problematic with Clubhouse. And because these clubs aren't recorded at all, there are virtually no consequences with what you can say sometimes. And some of the feedback that I got was basically underlying this, that anyone can talk about anything. And that sometimes with, for example, sensitive subjects like identity and race, it has turned out to be a complete disaster and more damaging than anything else. And I'm quoting from someone who gave me that feedback and responded to my Instagram story. And the person also said that they are a bit disappointed and that there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of getting carried away during talks. They personally would not go there unless they see someone they trust and admire doing a talk. Another piece of feedback that I received is something that I mentioned earlier on in this episode, and that is it has such a strong focus on the art market that often things that really, really interest art historians and academics aren't really present on the app. And it's not something that takes place a lot. It is really interesting, though, and important, in my opinion, to be up to date on art market things. It's not the main part of what I want to do, though. I do work in the art market, and so through my job, I stay quite informed anyway. And maybe that's why I would like a little bit of a change when I go on Clubhouse after work, for example. So that could just be because of my personal situation. And I'm sure that for a lot of you listening and for a lot of you who are active on Clubhouse, art market chats can be very, very stimulating and very useful. But I am going to talk about an example, and the example is with NFTs. And for those who don't know, NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and it's very strongly connected with digital art and cryptocurrencies. There are a lot of really great articles out on what NFTs are and what's kind of going on within the art world at the moment. And this was something that was extremely popular to talk about on Clubhouse. And that's for a couple of weeks. That was all anyone could talk about. And a couple of times I was tempted because, for those who don't know, I wrote my undergraduate dissertation on artificial intelligence in art. So when it comes to technology within art historical discourse, I have studied it, I've looked into it, and I've formed my own opinions about it. And I find it incredibly interesting. But that's not what the topics were. It had nothing to do with the implications of what technology could have on authorship or participation or collaboration with technology or anything like that. And even when I tried to ask about these things and have a discussion about these things, it wasn't really of interest. Most of it was about market value, was about earning money, and things like that. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this. But for me, it wasn't it. It wasn't what I wanted to talk about. It was nothing that really interested me. And what I really don't enjoy is that a lot of things that could be really, really interesting about NFTs and a lot of things that could interest academics or be very, very beneficial for artists, those things end up taking a back seat to people who are talking about this investment situation and being at the forefront and being innovative within a marketplace and not necessarily within art historical discourse, which is something that personally interests me. But hey, that's just my opinion. That's just what I have experienced. And so that's why I'm sharing it. I'm sharing it with you here. I should also probably just quickly mention that when I say academics, I don't mean that people who are interested in NFTs or who work within the art market are not academics. I'm just referring to the people who aren't active within the art market professionally at the moment and thus have no actual reason to be sitting and talking in depth about the market value of NFTs, for example. So I'm referring to art history professors or possibly museum curators and researchers, which are also present within auction houses. But that's what I'm referring to. It's probably not the most accurate term, but I think that I get my point across. If after all of this, you're interested in going on the app, I do have invites because it's invite only. But right now, the app is only available for iPhone users as it's apparently still in its beta phase. And, this whole invite-only system is also highly problematic because it makes it very exclusive, which makes it then very desirable. But hey, if anyone wants an invite and you have an iPhone, message me and you will get an invite. I don't know if I really agree with the system. As I said, I think that because it's in its beta phase or whatever, that it's to keep the app from crashing or to keep it from getting too overloaded, I guess. But what do I know about apps? Anyway, I do find it really useful, and I have had a lot of fun learning about different things and meeting different people, looking into the works of different people, listening to their opinions. And I find that really wonderful because this exchange within art historical discourse and generally not only within art historical discourse, but as art professionals, because the sector of the arts is so broad. And I've really learned that through going and listening to what other people are saying and their opinions and things like that. So I've personally really benefited from it in some way or another. So all in all, I find it a useful and fun app, and I've really enjoyed being on it for the most part. I've listened to some amazing women and I've felt really inspired. So the app is a nice way to access these types of things. And I'm sure that this will change in a few months, if not weeks. But, for now, this is my current summary of my experience. If anyone wants an invite, I've said I have a few. So feel free to message me on my Instagram if you're interested in trying it out. And of course, if you have the technology to do so. i.e., you have an iPhone. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.